Chevy, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Daled of Masechta Ayruvin. Yeah, that's exciting, right? Right. So, some of the sugyas of today. Spreading out stuff so that you don't slip. Can you spread out stuff so that you don't slip? What do you guys think? Making sounds on Shabbos. Can you make sounds? Chevy, what do you think? Some cliffhangers, right? Chevre, let's get started. Daf Kuf Daled of Masechta Ayruvin, 6 lines in to the page. Bozkin melach al gabe kevesh b'shvil shelo yachliku. Who could tell me what the kevesh is? The kevesh is the ramp of the Mizbeach. So what the Mishnah is saying is that in the Beis HaMikdash, we can spread out salt on the ramp to the Beis HaMikdash so that the Kohanim do not slip when they are ascending the ramp. Okay? Umimala mibor agola mibor agodo begilgal begalgal b'shabbos umbe'er akir b'yomtiv. Okie dokie. The Gemara is going to explain what these things are, but we could fill up from the bor agola and from the bor hagadol. Those were these lishkos. Chevra, we're going to learn together in Masechta, was it Masechta Talmud, Masechta Midas? Maybe Masechta Midas, in about just around another 6 years from now. We're going to learn about all the different offices that were in the Beis HaMikdash. So, there were these pits that they had, and you could fill up water from these pits using a windlass. Now, Reb Dennis, maybe you could tell us what a windlass is. I looked it up, Lemaise. I looked it up, but I didn't know what it was. Apparently it's some kind of thing that you use to crank, to pull up a bucket. It's like gears and stuff, and you crank it, and it pulls up the bucket. So you'd be allowed to fill up water using a windlass in the Beis HaMikdash. Be'er akir b'yomtiv, and a be'er akir on Yom Tif. We're going to have to explain what that is. Says the Gemara, Ramale Rav Ika mi Pashronia l'Rava. So Rav Ika from Pashronia asked the kasha to Rave. Excuse me. Tanan, we learn in the Mishnah, Bozkin melach agabe akevish b'shvil shelo yachliku. So we said in our Mishnah that in the Beis HaMikdash you'd be allowed to spread out salt on the ramp of the Mizbeach so that the Kohanim do not slip. Now, the implication being, B'mikdashin b'mdina lo, that, yeah, this is allowed in the Beis HaMikdash. It would not be allowed outside of the Beis HaMikdash, i.e., if it's wet out, if it's raining, or maybe even if it's, there's ice out, and you want to put out some salt. So it sounds like that would not be allowed. Right, so in the Beis HaMikdash it's allowed. Outside of the Beis HaMikdash you wouldn't be allowed to apply salt to prevent slipping. V'ramini, but we have a contradiction. If you have a chotzer that got ruined with meimei geshamim, with rainwater, maybe tevenu meradeba. So you could bring straw and lay it out so that you don't slip in the mud or, get all muddy or whatever it is. So on the one hand, we're saying only in the Beis HaMikdash were you allowed to put out salt to prevent slipping, whereas over here we're saying, well, even outside of the Beis HaMikdash you're allowed to put out straw to prevent slipping. So the Gemara answers, well, shayni tevin. Yeah, that's exactly correct. You could put out straw. You can't put out salt. Straw is unique to lo mevatale because you are not mevatel the straw. Meaning, you don't just say, oh, my chutzner is muddy from the rain. Let me just take my straw that I've been saving for the animals and just throw it on the floor and ruin it. No, that's not the point. Yeah, you'll put it out in your chutzner maybe to prevent people from slipping, but you don't intend to leave it there. You're going to take it and you're going to use it to feed your animals. And therefore, there is no concern of la'ashvuye gumis, as we learned about the Masechta Shabbos, of filling in and flattening out holes. So, meaning the reason why you would be unable to put salt, right? The reason why we say that you're allowed to put salt on the ramp of the Mizbeach, but not outside of the Beis HaMikdash, is because we're concerned, well, if you put out salt, you might then end up coming to flatten out holes in the ground, which would be the malacha of boneh. So to prevent that outcome, the rabbis forbade you from applying salt to the ground. However, says the Gemara, teven, straw, would not fall into that prohibition since you are not mevatel it. Since you are planning to then take the straw and feed it to your animals later, so it wouldn't come under the malacha of boneh, of building, of putting the straw there for long term and fill in any unevenness that might be in the ground. Now, going back to the salt on the mizbeach, on the kevesh, on the ramp, how exactly was this happening? So when they would spread out the salt on the ramp, they would be mevatel it, and they would say, we don't plan on retaking this, like we're just being mevatel it. So kamosif abinyan. Well, then you're basically going to be adding to the mizbeach, right? You're adding another element to the construction of the mizbeach. You're adding salt, and you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to add on to the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. So v'idloka mevatle, and if you are not mevatel this salt, so you're still planning to use it later for maybe tanning hides or whatever it is, so kahav chatzitza. But then it'll be chatzitza, as we learned in the context recently of bandages that are on the hands of the Kohanim, that they have to remove them so that there shouldn't be anything in between their body and the work that they're doing. So here also, if you apply salt to the mizbeach and you're not mevatel it, so then it's going to be significant in its own right, and it's going to be lying between the feet of the Kohanim and the mizbeach that they're climbing. So the Gemara answers, So the Gemara answers that they are not mevatel, this salt. So what about the chatzitza? Well, they would spread out the salt in the context of bringing the limbs of the animals up to the top of the mizbeach. That while it's a mitzvah to burn the limbs of the animals on the mizbeach, it's not a mitzvah per se to walk them on top. Walking them to the top of the mizbeach is merely a means to an end. The end being, right, the mitzvah being burning the limbs. Walking the limbs up to the mizbeach is really just something that's necessary in order to get them to the top, but it's not significant in its own right. And therefore, if there is salt between the, underneath, between the ramp and the feet of the Kohanim who are bringing up the limbs, that is insignificant. Vilo, is bringing the limbs of the animal really not a malacha, really not in avoda in the Beis Hamikdash? It says, what was that, in the context of a korban ola? That the korban tamid maybe, that the kohen will bring up the limbs of the animal and burn them on the mizbeach. Va'amar mar, and we said zo'alacha sivarim lakevesh, that this pasuk is referring to davka walking the limbs up the ramp to the top of the mizbeach. So we see that from the fact that it says ve'ikriva kohen, that the kohen needs to do this avoda of walking the limbs up the ramp, it must mean that it is part of the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore you can't spread out salt and have a chatzitza between the feet of the kohen and the ramp. So ela ema bolachas eitzim l'mayracha. Rather, no, the avoda that we're talking about is bringing the wood up to the top of the mizbeach. That bringing the wood up the ramp to the top of the mizbeach is not a particular etelav avodahi, that it's not an avoda, and for that it would be acceptable to spread out salt so that nobody slips, and the fact that there will be a separation between the feet of the kohen and the ramp is not of particular significance. Okay. Very beautiful. Darash Rave. So Rave darshaned. What did he say? As we said earlier, if you have a chatzar and it's raining, it got all muddy, so you could bring straw and spread it out so that nobody slips. So if Papa says to Rave, but we learn in a brayzik that when he spreads out this straw, he can't just spread it out just however he wants. there's a little bit of a restriction over here. He can't use a basket or a box, rather uses the bottom of a box. Like if you have a box that kind of broke and now there's the bottom, you can use that in order to spread it out. Meaning there has to be some kind of a shinoi, some kind of a difference. You can't just, it's not like free for all that you can just spread out straw. So why is Rava saying that you can just spread it out however you want? So Hadu Ukim Rava Amora Ale Vidarash. So Rava said, you're right, and he called a Amora, like a teacher, meaning that the way that they would do it is that the rabbi would kind of say something, and then you would have this teacher who would then profess it to everybody else. So he got this professor to come, and he taught, that the things that I had said earlier were a mistake. Bram, however, Kach Amrud, this is what they said, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Different gears say Rabbi Lazar. That when you apply this straw to your courtyard, when it's all muddy, don't just apply it however you want. Rather, you should use the bottom of a box. Continues from an excerpt from the Mishnah, that you're allowed to fill up water from this pit in the Beis HaMikdash using a windlass. Kidoki. Ula ikla levei Rav Menashe. Ula was visiting the house of Rav Menashe. Who was Rav Menashe? I wonder. Also, Ugava Taraf Abava. A certain person came and it was Shabbos and he knocked on the door. Omar manhai lischil gufe dekamachile l'shabbata. Ula said, who is this nudnik? May his body be desecrated because he desecrated the Shabbos. Oof. Wow. Ula's Charif. Yeah, we know Ula's a shtickle Charif. Remember the story with Ula and Yalta? When he acted up in front of Yalta and she destroyed all the wine? Akoponim. Ula was not particularly happy that this fellow knocked on the door on Shabbos. Amalei Rabba. Rabba says to Ula, Lo asur ela kol shel shir. Rabba said, the only thing that's problematic is musical notes, but not just knocking on a door. So Eisvei Abai, and Abai asked the kasha on his Rebbe Rabba, Mailim b'diofe u'metifin me arak l'chole b'Shabbos. So Mailim b'diofe is basically create some kind of, what's that thing called? A siphon, I think. Basically, if you have two barrels of wine and you want to transfer the wine from one barrel to another barrel, you could take like two reeds and you cut and connect them in a right angle. You suck at the bottom, you stick one of the reeds into the barrel, you then suck on the bottom of the other side of the right angle reed thingy that you contracted, and then it kind of starts drawing the wine. You remove your mouth and then the wine kind of continues drawing from the barrel, and you don't tell anybody how you just got the wine from one barrel to the other barrel. And then so you're allowed to do that. And umatifin me arak lechole. And so an arak was this interesting kind of contraption where almost imagine like a beaker, kind of like a beaker, I guess, but like, oh man, it's not that hard to explain. Basically, some kind of container that you would put water in. Now, it's kind of like a science experiment. So when the top of it was closed and no air can come in from the bottom of the container, there were like all these little holes. So as long as the top of the container is closed, none of the water will come out because it's not being replaced by air. But when you open up the top of this container thing, well then air can come in and then the water drips out through the bottom. And then you would put this over a metal plate, and as the water drips out, it would make a sound. And that was useful for sick people who you had to kind of give them space, but you also wanted to maybe wake them up or put them to sleep, whatever it might be. So the Gemara says, L'chole in levari lo. Okay, so you can use this arak for a chole, right? This thing that makes noise with the dripping, for a chole, but not for a regular person, i.e. you can't generally use this on Shabbos. And heichidami. Now, what's the use case for this arak? So lav denim v'kabayit delisar, is it not talking about a fellow who's sleeping and you want to wake him up? Shmamina olude kala asir. So we see that making noise is in and of itself a problem, meaning a Abaye is making the argument that this arak thing is used just in order to make sound, right? You have a person who's not well and he's sleeping, and you don't want to wake him up, start in a startling way or touch him. So you use this arak, but the goal is that the water trickling down onto the metal is simply going to make noise, not necessarily going to make music. And we're saying that that's a problem. It's allowed for a sick person, but not for somebody who's well. So we see that simply making noise is a problem. So it's a kasha on Rabbah, who said that it would have to specifically be music. So lo, desir v'kabai dilenim. No, rather what it's talking about is this sick person is awake and you want to soothe him to sleep. So the mishtamea kikala dim mazome, that it sounds like cymbals. Now I assume it's probably not startling cymbals since we want him to go to sleep. Maybe some kind of a soothing gong or something. Hakoponim. So therefore we can argue that is particularly talking about some kind of a musical melody of sorts, and that's why it's forbidden. Okay. Eisvei, Abaye tries again. Hamishamer peirosav mipnei ofis. If you have a fellow who is guarding his fruits from birds, udelav mipnei achaya, or he's trying to guard his gourds from a beast, mishamer kedarko b'Shabbos, so he can guard it in a regular way on Shabbos, meaning you can watch it. Okay. But there are a few caveats. Do not clap, do not bang your chest, and do not dance in the way that you do during the week. Okay, very beautiful. My time, how come? Lav de kamolid kala, v'cholalude kala osir. So what's the problem with clapping and with banging on your chest? Is it not because, that'll make a noise, and making noise on Shabbos is a problem? So that's what Abaye is trying to argue against Rabbah. So Amar V'acha bar Yaakov, Gezer Shema Yitol Tzror. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov is concerned that maybe you will then take a stone and chuck it. So and that would be a problem. So it's not per se about making noise, it's about chucking a stone. Okay. Ve'lohada Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, that which Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav, Noshim Hamasachakos be'egozim Osir, that you have these women who like to play with these different kinds of nuts. I think like some kind of like marbles kind of game maybe, and they would, I don't know, I don't play it, but maybe you would like roll some nuts to like against each other or something. Akopanim, it's not allowed. Why not? My time, how come? Lav to kamolid kala v'cholunde kala osir. Is the issue not that, because when these nuts kind of like hit against each other, they're going to make noise, and that's a problem. Lo, the issue is that, they want to have a smooth surface for rolling these nuts, and therefore you might come to fill in any unevenness that might be in the floor, and that would be ashvuye gumis. So to prevent that, we say don't play with these nuts. The ilote ma'achi, because if you don't say it like this, the Amar of Yehuda, that which Rav Yehuda said, Nashim mesachkos betapuchim aser, that the women can't even play with apples. They want to, I guess, throw apples against each other. Sounds like fun. Now over there isn't much noise, because these apples, when they bump against each other, aren't really going to make too much noise. Rather, the issue must be that you might come to fill in unevenness in the floor. Alright, so we still have not succeeded in finding an instance where making noise in and of itself is a problem on Shabbos. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Mimalan mibor agola, mibor agodol, bigalgal b'Shabbos. So you can fill up water from this bor agola, or from this bor agodol, using this windlass on Shabbos. But Mikdash im b'mdina lo, we say it's allowed in the Beis HaMikdash, but not outside of the Beis HaMikdash. My timer, how come? Lav mishum olude kala ve'asir. Is it not because this windlass makes noise, I guess, when you crank it, and therefore it would be unallowed? Lo, gizera shema yamala liginaso l'chor vaso. No, the problem is that you might fill up water from this windlass and then use it for your garden or your dilapidated ruin. I guess for whatever reason you want to put water in your dilapidated ruin. Okay, nothing like having a dilapidated ruin on the last stop of Ayruvin, or the second to last, even if it's in a different context than we're used to it. But don't want to miss out on that dilapidated ruin. A Maimar shara lemimale begilgala b'mechoza. A Maimar actually allowed the people to use this windlass in Mechoza. Omar, my time agazu rabbanon. His reasoning was, well, if we think about it, what's the reason why the rabbis said that you're not allowed to use a windlass? Well, because maybe you'll fill up from the windlass and then you'll use the water for your garden or for your dilapidated ruin. Here in Mechoza, we don't have gardens and we don't have dilapidated ruins. Okay, I'm a little surprised because in Mechoza was like, always has that vibe of like wealthy metropolitan vibe. So why wouldn't they have gardens? Taruba kitana aser lehu. But then when a Maimar saw that they were actually using the water that they would draw from the windlass to soak flax, so then he said that actually it is not allowed. You're not allowed to use this windlass on Shabbos. Okay, very beautiful. And they could fill up from this be'er hakir on Yom Tif. My be'er hakir. What is this be'er hakir? Amar Shmuel. Bor shehikiru alea dvarim v'tirua. Oh, it's a certain pit that they what's the word? That they hikir oh gosh, they I don't know. They deliberated, I think is the word I'm looking for, that they deliberated around it and said that it's permitted. And apparently this was like when they were coming back from the exile to Eretz Yisrael and the mamish needed to drink water, and it was Yom Tif, and they said, you know what, they discussed it and they determined that they would be allowed to draw water from this particular well. That is this Be'er Hakir, this Be'er that they kind of spoke about, that they called out about. Okay? Meisvei, but we have a contradiction. Lo kol aboros akiros itiru elazo bilvad. 1 second, we have a contradiction. It says that they didn't permit all the boros akiros, rather this one particular one. Now, v'i amar she'ikiru dvarim alea maizo bilvad. Now, if Shmuel is correct that it's this particular pit that they were deliberated about, well, then what does it mean that, then what's the deal with this brisa that says that there were actually all sorts of boros? There were lots of them, and only one particular one was permitted. But according to Shmuel, there was only, a grand total of one of these boros hakiros, that it was a particular well that they spoke about. So El Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak ber Mayim Chaim. Rather, says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who I feel like we haven't seen too much of Nachman bar Yitzchak in Masechta Ayruvin. Masechta Shabbos, I think we saw a lot of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, but I feel like we haven't seen him too much in Masechta Ayruvin. Akopanim, he says that what this Be'er Akir is that it's a Be'er Mayim Chaim, a Be'er of running water, of flowing water, of lively waters. Shenemar Ke Hakir Bayer Memel V'Gomer, that like a pit flows its water. So what it means is that there were, it's Be'er Akir is just a Be'er of flowing water, but there was one particular one that they permitted its use on Yom Tif. Gufa, we said earlier, lo kol boros hakiros itiru elazo bilvad, that they didn't permit all of these boros hakiros, rather one particular one. Usha'alu pnei hagola, when the people of the Galus came up to Eretz Yisrael, and it says Rashi, not yet, chanu aleh, they encamped around this particular Be'er Mayim Chaim, unvim shebenein hitiru lain, and the prophets among them permitted them to draw water from it. And Mistamu was Yom Tif. Says Rashi, Nivim Sheboim Chagay Zechariah Umalachi. Oh, Velo Nivim Shebenein Ela Minag Avosim Biyadem. But I guess apparently it wasn't actually the prophets among them. Rather, it was a particular minag, particular tradition that they had, that this well was usable. Chevra, let us stop here, and then tomorrow we will pick up from this Mishnah and bring it on home. Chevra, that was Daf Kuf Daled of Masechta Ayruvin. So the main sugyas, I think, were spreading out stuff so that you don't slip. So if that stuff is salt, so then it's allowed in the Beis HaMikdash in order to put on the Mizbeach, so that you can bring up the wood for the Mizbeach. However, outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you would be unable to use salt, because we have to be concerned about lashvuye gumis. However, straw you'd be allowed to put out if you kind of use the bottom of a broken box to spread it out with, because you're not going to be mevatel the straw. You're going to take the straw and then feed it to your animals, so you're not going to leave it there in order to fill in the unevenness in the ground. We talked about the sugya of making sounds on Shabbos. Ula said you're not even allowed to knock on a door on Shabbos. Rava says that's not true. What you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to make musical notes, but you'd be allowed to knock on a door. Abaye tried all sorts of ways to prove that Ula was correct, but he did not succeed. I think that those were really the main sugyas, chevre. I hope you enjoyed Daf Kuf Daled. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. We'll bring it on home. Peace out.